Man attacked by a giant python, but a group of lions appears, and the impossible happens. The sun was beginning to decline over the African savanna, spreading a golden light that bathed the dry grass in an almost unreal glow. The air still vibrated with heat, but already a cooler breeze slid between the acacias, carrying with it the sense of dust and wildlife. For Samuel Kanza, a forest ranger for nearly 15 years, it was an end of day like so many others, punctuated by the routine of his patrols. He knew this territory by heart, every path, every water point, every nook where lions sometimes came to rest in the shade of isolated trees. His job consisted of protecting this land, watching for poachers, maintaining the fragile balance between animals and men. Yet despite his experience, Samuel could never have imagined what was going to happen that evening. He advanced slowly through the tall grass, rifle slung over his shoulder, eye attentive. The familiar sounds of the savanna accompanied him, the distant cry of a hornbill, the incessant buzzing of insects, the crackling of twigs under his feet. But suddenly a strange silence fell over the place. The birds fell silent all at once, as if an invisible threat had just approached. Samuel stopped, frowning. He had learned to be wary of this kind of silence. His eyes swept the surroundings, scrutinizing every movement in the yellowed grass. And it was at that precise moment that it happened. First a slight tremor in the ground, imperceptible, then a heavy rustling, as if a mass was sliding in the gust. Before he could even react, a shadow emerged from the grass, quick as lightning. The ranger only had time to raise his arm before the snake reached him. It was a gigantic creature, of a size that defied imagination. Its dark body, covered with gleaming scales, unrolled endlessly, and its yellow eyes shone with an icy gleam. Samuel felt an enormous weight crash against him, throwing him to the ground. The rifle slipped from his hands and fell in the dust. The snake was already coiling around his torso, tightening its coils with crushing force. Samuel let out a cry, a mixture of pain and stupor. He had already seen pythons in his career, but never a creature of this size. Each contraction of the snake cut his breathing a little more. His ribs groaned under the pressure. He tried to free his arms, but the beast had trapped him in a deadly embrace. The world around him was shrinking. The flaming sky seemed to recede, replaced by the terrifying vision of the reptile's gaping maw, its curved fangs gleaming in the evening light. Samuel knew that if he didn't find an escape quickly, he would be crushed alive. He tried to remember the advice given during his training: stay calm, don't waste energy, look for a vulnerable point. But how to stay calm when his lungs demanded air and his muscles cramped under pain? His hand slid over the snake's scales, rough and cold, impossible to grasp. The snake hissed, a deep and sinister sound that resonated in the returned silence. Samuel felt his heart beating frantically. A wild panic threatened to engulf him. He thought of his family, of his wife who was waiting for him in the village, of his children who played every evening in front of the house. Was this how it was all going to end? In the shadow of an acacia, suffocated by a monster, emerged from the darkness? The pain intensified. His arms began to weaken. His gestures became less precise. Dust rose around him, sticking to his skin, moist with sweat. His eyes blurred. He thought he heard a dull noise in the distance, like a rumble. Was it his imagination? Were his senses playing tricks on him? No. The rumble became clearer. It was a roar. At first he thought it was a nightmare, a hallucination caused by lack of air. But soon the roar was followed by another, then a third. And there, emerging from the horizon, he saw them. 3 lions, majestic and terrifying, were charging straight toward him. Their silhouettes stood out in the golden light of sunset. The male, mane flowing in the wind, led the way, followed by 2 lionesses, supple and fast. Their eyes were fixed on the scene, their muscles rolling under their tawny skin. Samuel had an instant of additional terror. Were they going to attack him too? Could he survive both the snake's bite and the power of these predators? But the lions didn't seem to be targeting him. Their gazes were fixed on the snake, this monster that dared to challenge their kingdom. The ground trembled under their steps. The snake, surprised, slightly loosened its grip, just enough for Samuel to breathe a painful gulp of air. He coughed, gasping, while his eyes remained fixed on the unreal scene unfolding before him. Never would he have imagined being saved by those very ones he had observed from a prudent distance for so many years. Yet that was exactly what was happening. The lions were charging straight at the giant snake, and the impossible was about to be realized. The first impact was a dry, dull, almost bony sound when the lead lioness struck the snake's flank. Samuel, still lying in the dust, felt the grip shift a notch on his ribcage. The coil closest to his sternum slipped. The crushing became an oblique pressure. In this tiny shift, he found breath. Air entered his lungs like cold water after an interminable crossing. He had a retch, a coughing fit that burned his throat. Tears came to his eyes. But he was alive, still conscious enough to understand that his survival now depended on a game of instincts that no longer directly concerned him. The male approached cautiously, a deep growl vibrating in his chest. His mane caught copper reflections in the setting sun. Paws placed wide, he evaluated the enemy. The snake, surprised by the feline's charge, tried to reorient itself. Its head, triangular, rose above Samuel, mouth half open on a black tongue that tasted the air seeking information. The scent of lions was everywhere, musky, animal, undeniable. In the raised dust, dry grass whipped Samuel's calves, who froze. He knew that a sudden movement could tip everything. The second lioness attacked first. She aimed for the central coil, at the level where the snake thickened its grip. She planted her fangs there and pulled backward, the muscles of her shoulders bulging under the skin. A gasp tore from Samuel's throat, not of pain but of painful relief. The pressure decreased again. The snake, shaken however, tightened elsewhere, lower around his hips as if a steel chain was reconfiguring to compensate for the loss of grip. The ranger felt numbness rising in his legs. Then the male leaped. He didn't bite immediately. He used his front paw like a hammer, bringing it down on the snake's head with almost calculated precision. A dull shock resounded. The reptile's head wavered, and the lioness holding the middle pulled harder, tearing from the snake a fold of scales whose surface became stained with dark, thick blood. The beast hissed, a vibrating sound that made the air all around vibrate, and launched its jaw toward the male's paw. The latter withdrew his limb in time, but a line of blood was already beating on his cannon, proof that the fangs had grazed the artery. Samuel huddled against the earth, distinctly heard his own heart pounding in his temples. His rifle lay within reach, but every millimeter cost. He slid one finger, then two, seeking the wood of the stock. His vision blurred at intervals, black dots danced at the periphery. He forced himself to breathe slowly, like blowing on a nascent fire. The world recentered. The cold roughness of metal, the bitter smell of oil, the taste of dust in his mouth. He gripped. A few steps away, the struggle escalated. The snake, understanding that its only chance lay in speed, broke the heavy logic of its constriction and whipped the air with its caudal part. The lead lioness took the blow on the flanks and rolled in the grass, but got up immediately, mouth dripping with a mixture of saliva and reptilian blood. The male, meanwhile, positioned himself at an angle, seeking the angle to reach the enemy's neck. A bite at that spot could change everything. Samuel pulled the rifle to him. His fingers trembled so much he had trouble releasing the safety. His shooting instructor mind imposed itself, however, as if he was observing the scene from outside. Breathe, center, squeeze. But a new danger arose. Any poorly placed bullet could wound a lion, and wounding a lion in the middle of a melee was signing his death warrant. The shooting option evaporated. He remained lying down, holding the weapon like a powerless talisman, seeking a more humble but more useful role, survive without getting in the way. The snake folded back on itself, sacrificing part of its coil around Samuel to concentrate its mass forward toward the male. This choice offered the ranger a thin space. He slid his shoulder forward and finally freed his left arm. Pain exploded from his bicep to his clavicle as if his nerves were suddenly untying. He held back a cry. The lioness in the middle, taking advantage of the loosening, pulled again. This time a discreet cracking was heard, not of bone but of serpentine ribs compressed where the feline jaw pierced the layer of scales. The beast shuddered. The male then found his window. In one step he crossed the distance and closed his fangs on the upper part of the snake's head, just behind the eye. The resistance was that of a truck tire, thick, tough, almost unreal. He squeezed again until he felt something give way. A jet of black blood spurted, splashing his cheek and mane. The snake writhed in a titanic spasm. The world vibrated around Samuel, who was thrown aside, rolled like a bundle in the dust. He dropped the rifle, which departed a meter away, his mouth filled with earth. He spat, coughed, his lungs rattling like a pierced bellows. The combat lasted seconds that seemed like hours. The lead lioness returned to the charge, planting her claws in the coil that still encircled Samuel's hips, and sank her fangs there, pulling in the opposite direction of the twist. The muscular fibers of the beast quivered under the scaly skin. Samuel felt the grip loosen noticeably. He could finally bring his knees under him. He tried to straighten up and failed. The second attempt was successful, one knee in the dust, then the other, then a support on the hand. His head was spinning, his thorax was screaming, but he was free from the deadly coils, or almost. The snake, in a desperate maneuver, suddenly abandoned the man to concentrate all its violence on the lions. It tried to flee, perhaps sensing that the balance of power had shifted. The flight was a heavy undulation toward a clearing of less tall grass. The lioness in the middle, the most tenacious, remained hanging on its flank, carried for a meter, then let go to recharge. The male, meanwhile, didn't let go of the head. He squeezed and shook, struggling to immobilize an adversary devoid of limbs but not of power. Samuel staggered to his rifle. His fingers found the stock. He raised the weapon, shouldered it. The sight alignment danced for a moment, then stabilized on the portion of the reptilian body farthest from the felines. He wasn't aiming to kill. He was aiming to weaken, to impose a shock that would help the lions without putting them in danger. He thought about the caliber, the trajectory, the crushing inertia of this mass. For a fraction of a second, he wondered if shooting wouldn't trigger an unpredictable reaction in the lions. Then he squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, sharp, bouncing against the acacias. The bullet struck the snake in the rear third, where the muscles contracted to propel the flight. The impact broke the undulating rhythm. The beast convulsed. Its body described a brutal curve that raised a cloud of dust. The male took advantage of this imbalance to replant his fangs and, with a short and furious movement, twist the head toward the ground. The neck bent. A more frank cracking resonated, this time without ambiguity. The great beast stopped struggling like a storm. Its strength remained terrible for a few more seconds, then declined like the breath of a fire dying for lack of air. The lead lioness released her grip and backed away, panting, her flanks traversed by a shudder. The second lioness remained facing the stretched body, mouth open, tongue hanging, ready to resurge at the slightest jolt. The male, meanwhile, kept the bite for a few more moments until he felt all resistance vanish. Only then did he loosen his jaw and step back, eye fixed, neck stained with a dark mask. An unusual silence fell back over the savannah, a silence not of absence but of listening, as if everything that lived around was taking note of what had just occurred. Samuel, the weapon still aimed without realizing it, slowly lowered the barrel. His shoulder was trembling. He placed the rifle on the ground, let himself fall beside it, and sat down, legs stretched out in front of him, unable to catch his breath regularly. He brought his hand to his ribs. A sharp pain pierced him there. He knew without any doubt that 2, perhaps 3 ribs were cracked. His shirt was sticking, soaked with sweat, streaked with dark traces where the scales had scraped his skin. The lions were looking at him. It was a strange sensation, stronger than all those he had known until then in his career as an observer. They weren't looking at him like prey. There was in their eyes a mixture of residual tension and cold evaluation. The 2 lionesses remained a little behind the male, their ears pivoting toward the slightest sounds. The male took 2 steps forward, not toward Samuel but circling him, to position himself between the man and the snake. He stationed himself there, massive like a wall. And Samuel understood. As long as the reptile's body hadn't been recognized as harmless, the lion would keep guard. The forest ranger slowly raised his hands, palms open, and looked away. He knew enough about the difference between challenging and respecting. He tilted his head, a gesture that didn't belong to his culture, but that intuition dictated to him, not to make himself tall, not to believe himself invited. The tension, imperceptibly, relaxed. The lead lioness sat down, her tail whipping the dust in an irregular rhythm. Samuel thought of his radio. He had it in the side pocket of his jacket, but the idea of bringing to his mouth an object that would click, of emitting a burst of static in this suspended moment, seemed dangerous to him. The lions, nervous, had just fought an exhausting battle. Better to be patient. He glanced at the snake. The body stretched out in a broken line, betraying internal lesions. The skin, sublime and horrible at the same time, still shone with bronze reflections. He felt a contradictory emotion rise, a wave of respect for the creature that had nearly taken him away, and an overflow of gratitude for the felines who had reversed destiny. Minutes flowed by, long as dawn hours. Gradually, the lions passed from a state of alert to a state of attentive vigil. The male approached the snake and gave it a paw blow, cautious, no movement. He sniffed the air above the half-open mouth, caught the metallic odor, the absence of breathing. He turned towards Samuel, their gazes met. The ranger's heart suddenly beat faster, not from fear, but from a sort of primary dazzlement. The animal saw him, really, not as an object in the landscape, but as something that had shared the theater of this moment. Samuel broke the fixity first, choosing humility again. He half curled up, placed both hands on the ground, and picked up his rifle barrel toward the earth. Then slowly, without turning his back on the lions, he stepped back a few paces, reaching the meager shade of an acacia. He could lean against it and finally slide a hand to his pocket to grasp the radio. He pressed the transmitter. Basta, Samuel, do you copy? You triggered a gunshot, confirm. The voice, familiar, seemed to come from another world. Samuel searched for his own in a scratched breath. Samuel debased. He had to swallow his saliva. Incident confirmed. Snake. Exceptionally large. Neutralized. Need medical assistance. Position. West sector, beacon 14, 400 meters south of the water point. A radio silence. Then voices overlapping, the administrative machine setting in motion. 2 rangers in a 4x4, first aid kit, beacons lit, 10 minutes estimated. Samuel thanked with a button press. He put down the radio, closed his eyes for a moment. When he reopened them, the lions were still there, but closer to each other, as if the falling adrenaline reminded them of group cohesion. The lead lioness stretched, a spectacular yawn revealing the dark pink of her palate. The other lay down, belly to the ground, head high. An absurd thought crossed Samuel's mind. If I survive, how to tell this without betraying it? Stories tend to exaggerate, to simplify, to transform nuances into symbols. Yet nothing here was simple. The lions weren't guardian angels. They had acted as predators confronted with an unusual threat on their territory. Perhaps attracted by the agitation, perhaps by the opportunity of a confrontation, their help wasn't a human intention. It was a convergence of natural interests. But this lucidity didn't take away anything from the evidence. Without them, he would be dead. A rustling, then a fairly close guttural cry made the felines raise their heads. In the distance, a group of antelopes had gathered, motionless, their fine silhouettes cut out against the sky. They observed, anxious, hesitating to resume the routine of grass. The male turned his attention to them for a moment, then returned to the immediate scene like a sovereign weighing priorities. He approached Samuel by 3 slow steps, nonchalant in appearance. The ranger felt a tension run along his spine. He forced his breathing to slow down. The lion stopped 6 meters away, tilted his head slightly, breathed in the man's scents, sweat, metal, dust, fear, then turned around without haste. The following minutes dispersed in sensations. The dull burning of his ribs, the tingling of superficial cuts on his forearm, the extraordinary clarity of the world, every blade of grass, every buzz, the ferruginous aftertaste of blood in his mouth where his teeth had bitten his cheek while falling, and above all the attention of the lions, neither hostility nor friendship, but a sort of co-presence. Samuel felt almost laid bare by this animal, gaze that doesn't judge, that notes, that calculates reality by the simple measure of hunger, risk, and strength. The rumble of the 4x4 split this bubble. It came from the north, skirting the thickets to avoid ruts. One of the lions pricked up his ear. The male advanced 2 steps and positioned himself facing the track as if to announce that access to the theater of the drama still passed through his sovereignty. Samuel raised his arm and signaled to the vehicle, a hand oscillating gently. The headlights, useless in the residual light, remained off. The vehicle slowed down, stopped about 20 meters away. 2 silhouettes got out, slow, respectful. It was Joseph and Amy, longtime colleagues, experienced. They knew the protocols, certainly, but above all they knew the language of the place, that of distance. They froze, evaluated. Amy placed the kid at her feet, palms open in a waiting posture. Joseph, without really looking at him, addressed the lions, a sort of silent salute, a nod of the head. Modest. The male sniffed, turned away. The lionesses followed his movement, graceful, and all 3 slid to the side, skirting the area, moving away toward the west. The sun, now almost disappeared, traced a last band of copper on their spines before their silhouettes dissolved in the shadow. Only then did Samuel's body seem to remember that it had suffered. His muscles relaxed all at once, and with this relaxation came pain, full, heavy, almost overwhelming. He breathed too quickly, became dizzy, had to put his hand on the ground to avoid falling. Joseph ran up, knelt down. Don't move too much, breathe gently. We'll get through this, my brother. The words, simple and fraternal, cracked the barrier of composure that Samuel was stubbornly trying to maintain. A laugh escaped him, a dry laugh, almost a sob. He nodded, unable to articulate. Amy was already applying a compressive bandage on a cut deeper than the others, above his elbow. She observed his ribs without touching them, so as not to aggravate. Her gaze slid to the snake, evaluated the length, the diameter, the unrealistic magnitude. By all the saints, single quotes, she murmured. You faced a myth. We did, Samuel corrected in a hoarse voice, casting a brief glance toward the horizon where the lions had melted into the grass. We faced it. They installed Samuel in the back of the 4x4 on a blanket. Joseph picked up the rifle, emptied the chamber, engaged the safety. Amy took quick photos of the snake, not for glory, but for the report, for science, to understand what, in a known ecosystem, had generated such excess. Perhaps an old individual, a rare combination of prey abundance and lack of competition, advantageous genetics. Perhaps also a monstrous chance, as sometimes happens. Samuel, lying down, watched the sky sink toward deep blue. He counted his breaths, lengthening them despite the pain, applying the exercises he taught young rangers after a run. He felt his consciousness float, grow heavy, rise like a buoy. Images passed: the snake's black tongue, the yellow eyes, the male's mane shaken with dust, the gleam of a canine. And in the middle, an absurd detail, a bird feather, white, stuck to his sleeve by sweat. The 4x4 started gently, skirting the snake's stretched body. The wheels crushed the dry grass with a paper rustling. Joseph held the wheel. Amy remained turned toward Samuel, speaking to him in a low voice to prevent him from slipping into too deep a sleep. They crossed the slight valley that isolated the clearing. At the crest, Samuel had the temptation to turn around to look one last time for the lions. He contented himself with closing his eyes and murmuring a thank you that was destined for no one in particular, or perhaps to the place itself. The journey to the post took 12 minutes. Upon arrival, they installed him under the veranda, on a solid table with a wheezy fan that stirred warm air. The park doctor, a dry man who spoke little, palpated delicately, diagnosed cracked ribs, various contusions, dehydration. He set up an IV, recommended strict rest, surveillance during the night. A team would leave at dawn to recover the snake, with the support of a biologist from the neighboring university. In the basic room where he was installed, Samuel remained awake for a long time. The familiar sounds of the camp cutlery clinking, end-of-service whispers, door slamming, brief burst of nervous laughter, each him muted, as if coming from very far away. His chest hurt with each breath, but a dull warmth also circulated, a sort of raw peace. He didn't try to explain. He let himself be carried by the thread of this day that could have been the last. Before falling asleep, he thought about how to tell it. He swore to refuse useless ornament, easy metaphors that would transform lions into knights and a snake into a demon. Reality had sufficed to overwhelm him with wonder and fear. Ha ha! Yet there was, he knew it, in this reality something elusive that belonged to the impossible, the convergence of trajectories, the obscure decision that had pushed a group of lions to interpose themselves between a man and certain death. The impossible had occurred, and because it had occurred, it ceased to be impossible. It was now a fact. One more stone in the secret house of true things. He slept. At dawn, the sky unfolded in shades of mauve and pink. Pain woke him before the hornbill's song. He sat against the pillow, breathing short but more regular. In the courtyard he heard footsteps, a pickup truck engine, calm voices, the preparation of the scientific team. He asked Amy, who had come to check on him, for permission to accompany them. She protested. Then, seeing Samuel's quiet determination, half yielded. He would come, but would stay in the vehicle. They left. The savanna, washed with freshness, seemed almost docile. When they reached the clearing, the snake was still there. Around, the night had left traces, fine prints, jackals, mongooses that had come to sniff without daring. The lions didn't return. Only the vultures, high in the sky, described large, prudent circles as if they knew this carcass didn't belong to them yet. The biologist, an energetic woman with precise gestures, took measurements and notes: length, circumference, estimated weight. She carefully observed the neck, nodding at the clean fracture. She was also interested in the feline fang marks and the ballistics of the bullet impact. Each trace told the deadly dance of the previous evening. Samuel, silent, listened, watched. He didn't feel like the owner of the story, only its custodian. When they had finished, Joseph crouched near Samuel, a tired smile at the corner of his lips. "You know, they'll only half believe us," he said. Samuel shrugged and grimaced. "Then we'll tell the half that counts." "Which one?" He reflected, then answered, "that a man can be saved by what he respects." Joseph looked at him for a moment, then stood up and gently patted his friend's good shoulder. The sun, now high, was already warming the skin. They loaded the snake onto a solid tarpaulin with straps. The pickup turned around. At the moment of leaving, Samuel turned his head toward the west. Over there in the distance, 3 tawny dots appeared and disappeared between the grasses like flashes of gold. He had the impression, pure illusion perhaps, that one of them stopped and looked toward them. He raised his hand, a useless yet necessary gesture. Then the vehicle rolled away. That day they didn't yet speak to the press. Reports were written, specialists consulted, maps checked, schedules reconstructed. The park rangers at the end of the afternoon came one by one to greet Samuel, some with jokes, others with a silence heavy with emotion. All in their way had understood that something exceptional had just taken place, something that didn't quite fit into statistics. The following night, Samuel dreamed he was walking in the savannah, holding in his hand not a rifle but a simple branch. The branch vibrated as if a life ran through it. In the distance, a snake glided, but it wasn't oversized. It was a snake as one sees them, neither more nor less. Between him and the man, 3 lions came and went, not to defend him, but to mark the passage. Like guardians of a threshold one crosses while bowing. When he woke up, he knew the hardest part remained, accepting that the impossible doesn't explain everything, and that sometimes it must be left as it is, intact, so that it continues to open doors in us that lead further than fear. The days that followed were made of slowness and relearning. Samuel remained at the park's medical post for a whole week. The cracked ribs healed poorly. Each breath remained a reminder of the combat. But more painful than the fracture was the memory of the embrace, the memory of his empty lungs, of that moment when consciousness narrowed to a black tunnel. At night he woke with a start, body covered in sweat, believing he felt the snake coiled around him again. It sometimes took several minutes for him to accept that it was only a memory, that the room was calm, that no shadow moved. His colleagues often came to visit him. Some brought news from the field, others hot dishes, words of comfort. Joseph remained the most discreet, sitting silently near his bed, telling only what was necessary, the number of animals observed, incidents with poachers, small camp anecdotes. Amy, she asked more direct questions. She wanted to understand every detail of the struggle, not out of unhealthy curiosity, but because she sensed the scientific importance of the event. Samuel answered patiently, describing what he had seen, felt, heard. The biologist who had come from the university had taken away the snake's body. First analyses confirmed it was an African python, Python sabae, but of a size exceeding all known data. Nearly 9 meters, more than 150 kilos of muscle mass. The exact age remained uncertain, but everything indicated an exceptional individual, surviving for decades thanks to ideal conditions. Its existence would feed articles, theses, debates. Yet for Samuel, beyond the figures, there remained the impression of having confronted an incarnation of nature's raw force. One evening, when the pain in his ribs had softened, Samuel asked to walk a few steps outside the room. Carefully supported by Joseph, he crossed the courtyard and sat under a large acacia. The sky blazed with orange and violet. The song of hornbills resonated in the warm air. Samuel breathed deeply despite the discomfort and let his thoughts wander. He thought of the lions. The more days passed, the more the scene seemed unreal to him. 3 wild beasts emerged like specters who had diverted death from a man. Was it simple coincidence? Perhaps the lions had been hunting this snake for a long time. Perhaps they had taken advantage of the opportunity. But fundamentally, logic wasn't enough. The image persisted, engraved in him, that of the male standing between him and the snake, like a guardian erected on the threshold of the impossible. The following week, he obtained authorization to return to his village for convalescence. His wife, Acha, welcomed him with tears in her eyes. His children threw themselves into his arms, shocked by his bandages, curious about his stories. That very evening, around the fire, he told. Not everything, not the most frightening details. He spoke of the snake, its size, the combat, the role of the lions. The children's eyes widened. Acha, silent, squeezed her husband's hand. She knew better than anyone how closely he had brushed with the end. Rumors spread quickly in the region. Some villagers saw it as a sign from the spirits, a warning or a blessing. Others spoke of a miracle. It was said that the lions had recognized in Samuel a protector of the savannah, and that they had chosen to save him. Samuel, embarrassed, always corrected the lions had chosen nothing for him. They had acted according to their instincts, and he was only a lucky witness. But stories escaped his control. They shaped themselves, as always when an event exceeds ordinary measure. A month later, recovered, Samuel resumed his patrols. His first return to the savannah was charged with emotion. Every bush, every bird cry seemed more intense to him. He carried his rifle, certainly, but he knew better than anyone that human weapons were only a fragile tool against the power of the wild world. One morning, while he was following a water point, he stopped short. In the grass, about 50 meters away, a familiar silhouette stood, a male lion, massive with a dark mane. Samuel felt his heart leap. Was it the same one? He couldn't be certain. Lions look alike, but certain details, the scar above the eye, the proud posture, made him believe so. The lion looked at him, motionless. Around, 2 lionesses stood back, observing. Samuel didn't move. He kept his hands visible, the rifle pointing toward the ground. The silence lasted long seconds, only troubled by the wind that bent the grass. Then the lion turned away, walked slowly toward the water, drank, and left with his companions. Samuel remained there, petrified, unable to say whether what he had seen was simple chance or a tacit salute. Back at camp, he told the scene to Joseph and Amy. Both listened attentively, but neither risked interpreting. In the savannah, everyone knew the boundary between chance and sign was blurry. Years passed. The story of the giant snake and the protective lions became a local legend. Tourists spoke of it, guides told it around the fire, children whispered it like a frightening but fascinating tale. Samuel, grown older, continued to patrol, but he also took time to train young recruits. To each he repeated the same lesson: the savannah doesn't belong to us, we only pass through it. Respect it, and sometimes it will respect you in return. One evening, many years later, as he walked alone in the declining light, he stopped again facing the horizon. Savannah vibrated with songs, movements, shadows. In the distance, he thought he saw a mane shine under the setting sun. He smiled, raised his hand as he had done long ago, then resumed his path. For he now knew that the impossible wasn't an insurmountable barrier. The impossible was only a fragile frontier, that sometimes, in the secret of the world, lions cross to remind us that we are part of a whole vaster than our fears.